Today, I am going to be talking about the eight worldly dharmas, eight worldly concerns. There are a lot of different names for this group of eight. They're frequently mentioned in text, but they're frequently just kind of gone over like, these are the eight worldly concerns, and then they go on to something else. They're, of course, mentioned usually negatively. And so I thought it would be good to give a simple teaching about these eight worldly concerns that we get preoccupied with, get immersed with in our daily lives, and so forth. So they are four pairs of opposites: pleasure and pain, praise and blame, fame and disgrace. Sometimes it could be fame and being ignored, like you don't exist. Other people don't think that you exist. And then, of course, gain and loss. Now, when these are referred to as the eight worldly dharmas, there are a lot of different meanings of the word dharma, which is a Sanskrit word. One is the teachings of the Buddha, but it also can mean a principle or a point. So there are the four dharmas of Gampopa, which many of you have heard of. And there are the six dharmas of Naropa. So it's referring to these different points in terms of these eight worldly dharmas. So to go into this in a little bit more, we like pleasure. We're attached to it. Secondly, we don't like pain. We like to get away from pain. It's pretty simple, pretty basic. We like it when we are praised. We get attached to praise. And we try to avoid criticism and blame. We get attached to fame, and fame includes having a good reputation. And we try to avoid disgrace. And of course, we don't want to become invisible, where nobody knows that we are even alive or recognizes us. And finally, of course, we're attached to getting what we want. This is called gain, whether it be financial gain or what other kind of gain we can think of that we want to have, things that we consider important in life, and we don't like it when we lose it. That's why we have insurance. And this is the way the world of samsara works. It sounds pretty simple, but when you get into it, it gets more complicated, more complex than that. Add with these eight pairs hope and fear. So we hope for pleasure, and then we're afraid we won't experience it. And the same goes with the other seven. And then there is, along with hope and fear, I wish this was clear. I made this cup of tea while I was gone. Now, how heavy do you suppose a cup of tea is? It doesn't matter. What makes it difficult to hold up is how long I hold it up. So how long do you think about hoping that something's going to happen? How long do you think about being afraid that it won't happen or that something bad will happen? It's a matter of how long you hold on to it, how long you think about it, worry about it, stress out about it, and so forth. So when you add hope and fear to all of these things, it gets even more complicated. To put it bluntly, now we have a soap opera because we have relationships with other people. We want them to praise us. We don't want others to blame us. And on with all of these things. It involves other people. So then we get into strategies in dealing with other people. And how are we going to come about getting what we want and avoiding what we don't want? As I was preparing this talk, for some reason or other, I just thought about what's going on in the United States right now in terms of politics. I think this is an excellent example of how these 8 worldly dharmas get wrapped up in our lives and the lives of other people. And I'm not here to talk about politics. I'm just pointing this out. Don't want to go into this any deeper. But this is the world of samsara that we live in, and it's based on a self that is independent, permanent, real, and then an other. This is what keeps samsara going. We are confused, others are confused. But then when you look into it, you find that, well, let's just talk about money. There is a thing called Bitcoin. There was this big court case about cryptocurrency. It seems real, maybe not. When I've gone over to Nepal, you have to buy Nepali currency. After you buy it, if you don't spend it, it's worthless outside of the country. And American currency, well, what's it worth? Well, that's why you have currency exchanges and daily, in fact, hourly values are placed on how much an American dollar is worth versus any other currency. It used to be you could turn in American currency for gold. Well, that dropped a long time ago. What is an American dollar worth? Really, it's a matter of what people agree on and believe in. So we have to remember these things. There's this illusion of this being real, actual, substantial, doesn't change, and so forth. And it's this way with everything that we value or that we are afraid of. It's based on what we believe, what other people believe. Some people, well, I used to work in a prison. Some people there would think that having a bad reputation would be great, thinking that you are a bad person and ruthless and dangerous and so forth. That's a good reputation. In fact, they will have tattooed tears here by their eye, and that means that you killed somebody. Here's another example. I stayed overnight with a friend of mine. He had a beautiful kitchen, a new kitchen cabinets, expensive kitchen cabinets, and it was made out of oak. Beautiful. For me, he stained it too dark, and I wouldn't have liked that style. But he really liked it. His wife really liked it. So what we consider, that we want, it depends on the person. There's not some absolute standard of this is what the best thing to want. It's like that. What food do you want? What food do you like? I think you'll find that when you are going out for dinner or when you're at home cooking for yourself, that a lot of other people don't necessarily agree with what you like for food. And it's just like that with so much of our life that it's very individual. What causes happiness, what kind of fame we want, what kind of respect we want, who we want to respect us. Again, here's a personal story about happiness. Decades and decades ago, I had horses here. I live out in the country, got a barn. It was no problem. I had to put up fences. And it was fun to ride them, take them out, go for rides, go to trail rides, go to horse shows, ride them in various horse events, and on and on and on. And it was enjoyable. And then I've suddenly, or maybe slowly, came to the realization that, well, you've got horses and you've got to make sure they have enough feed and you've got to make sure they have water, and you kind of look them over to make sure that they haven't hurt themselves, gotten cut on some barbed wire, or that they're within the fences and haven't gotten out of the fences. And then you need to trim their hooves. You have to give them veterinary care. And then you need equipment to make the hay, and on and on and on. And I suddenly realized there were easier ways to be happy that involved a lot less work, gave you more free time. So even what causes happiness is, let's say, up for debate. There is not some standard that this will make everybody happy. Now, on top of that, in samsara, then there are fleeting pleasures and there are fleeting discomforts. And then there's some that last longer than others. Very simply, if you're not happy before you get what you want, you probably will not be happy, at least for long, after you get what you want. I think we have all experienced this. It can be as simple as buyer's remorse. It can be you get what you want, and then, of course, then you see something else that you want. Shop until you drop, or whatever, but chase after it. You get it, and then you realize it doesn't make you as happy as you thought it would. One of my stories about this is I'm a father. My son has long since grown up and left home. He's in his 50s. But I remember at Christmas time when he was young, we would have Christmas tree and presents under the tree, and then start opening presents for himself and open it up, look at it, put it down, open up another present, pick it up out of the box, look at it, put it down, open another present. And when all the presents were opened, he would then look at his parents, and me being one of them, and say, "Is that all?" And I know none of us would ever do anything like that. It's funny, this chasing after temporary happiness. And on top of that, when we are looking for, let's say, approval from other people, positive feedback from other people, what we're actually doing is we are giving other people power over us. We are looking to them for approval, and we can't give ourselves approval because we feel we need it from somebody else. We become dependent on others. We become dependent on society for giving us positive messages about ourselves. And on and on and on. Again, this is the soap opera that we call samsara. So these are some of the problems with getting tied up in these 8 worldly concerns. They lead to seeking temporary happiness and perhaps never finding it. They take us going towards external sources of satisfaction, happiness, validation, and so on. We could spend a lifetime chasing after pleasure and avoiding pain, avoiding feeling discontent in the present, and never really succeeding in being happy. Again, look at the news. You'll find that there are a lot of people that are wealthy or have been wealthy and famous. It turns out that they really aren't that happy. I have looked up, I do this occasionally, someone famous dies, and then you look at their obituary or go to Wikipedia and look up their biography, and you find, yes, they were famous when they were younger, they were wealthy when they were younger, and then later on they got into drugs, they got into this, they got into that, and they had much more difficult life than you thought they had because they seemed famous and wealthy. So getting what you want and having fame, having wealth, it's impermanent, it doesn't last. Now, thanks to Buddhism, it doesn't have to be this way, that we can, through meditation practice and attending teachings, studying the Dharma, and so forth, realize that we don't have to be chasing after pleasure and running away from pain. Here is a Tibetan story that I think is very worthwhile at this point, and it's about a Tibetan nomad, way back somewhere in the past, before the modern era. And he had his own horses. Tibetan horses are more like large ponies. They're just big enough to be considered a horse. They are tough. They live at high altitudes. They have to be tough Well, one morning he woke up and a wild stallion had wandered into his corral, probably attracted by his horses, his mares. And he went out and closed the gate to the corral. And now he had this beautiful young stallion that would be great breeding stock, and as a result would be quite valuable. And of course, the villagers, when they heard about this, came and praised him, saying how wonderful this is. This is a very valuable horse. Suddenly you have much more wealth than you had before. You can breed your horses, your mares with them, and yada, 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 yada. And his answer was, well, maybe so, maybe not. So then the villagers quieted down and they left. And the next day, when he woke up, he found that the stallion broke out of the corral and taken with him all the farmers' mares. And now the villagers came and consoled him about, oh, how horrible this is. Now you've lost all your mares. How are you going to do your work in the spring? And you've just lost a small fortune. Maybe so, maybe not, Nomad answered. Well, the next day when he woke up there, the stallion had returned with the farmer's mares plus his own herd of mares. And of course, he closed the gate to the corral, and now the villagers came and started praising him about how he's now the wealthiest person in the whole valley with all these horses and that beautiful breeding stallion. And his answer was, well, maybe so, maybe not. Well, that day his son decided to break the stallion, to train the stallion, to domesticate him so he could be useful. And the stallion threw his son, and his son broke his leg. Now the villagers, when they heard about it, came to console him. Oh, who's going to do your help with your spring planting? This is terrible. Your son can't get around. He's in a lot of pain, and so forth. And the nomad said, well, maybe so, maybe not. The next day, the Mongol army came, and they, kind of like they do in Africa these days, they recruited all the young men of the village to fight their wars for them. They left the man's son with a broken leg behind because he was of no use to them. The point is that we need to develop some equanimity and not get sucked into this up and down when our circumstances change. We don't have to get so attached to good circumstances and negative circumstances to praise and blame, pleasure and pain, and so forth. Now, to go into this in even more detail, all of this is based on a solid self that is separate from other, that is giving the praise that you like to receive. Gyalwang Karmapa talks about the fabricated self, that who we think we are is put together from various experiences that we have during our life. To begin with, when we are born, we are given a name by somebody else, and then we identify with that name. But we don't pick the name. Maybe later on you change your name and you decide on a new one. But Yeshe was a name given to me when I took monastic vows, and Lama was given to me by Khenpo Karta Rinpoche. And then my name my parents gave me was John, and the last name Samuelson comes from my father. That none of these names did I choose. And then as you grow, you are told things by your parents and other people about yourself. And it might be that you are a good boy. It might be you are a bad boy. It could be you are smart. Nowadays, of course, at a very early age, you're on social media and doing games with other people, and on and on and on, and you gather all this information, and maybe your teacher tells you things at school about you. You're smart or you're not so smart. Or I remember one of my teachers telling me I reminded her of my older brother who would get into trouble. And we developed this idea of who we are. But it's fabricated from parts, from different parts of our experience. And you go from being an infant to a young child. Then there are the teenage years. Again, you go through some significant changes. I won't get into too much, but let's just say when we're a teenager, we're quite a bit different than when we were 10 years old. Suddenly there's some attraction to other people, whether it be of the same sex or the opposite sex. And then we become adults, supposedly at 21. As we get older, then we have midlife crises, and then there's geriatric psychology, hospice psychology, and on and on and on, that we continually change as we pass through life, that there is really, we think that there is something solid and permanent, but it's always changing. And in fact, we can look at ourselves in one situation one way and in another situation a totally different way. It's the way we are because it's fabricated. I like this idea of a fabricated self, that it's made out of parts, like you would fabricate, let's just say, a car out of parts. And the other definition of fabrication that the Karmapa is intended here is that fabricate as to lie, to make up, like fabricate evidence in a trial. This self that we have made up is illusion. It's a lie. It's not true. So we need to see these 8 worldly dharmas as being a distraction. They keep us from practicing. They keep us from studying. By pursuing them, we create a lot of negative karma. They keep us stuck in samsara, and they can keep us stressed out as well. So we need to understand that this is what we're dealing with, that they're false, and that it's workable. It begins with meditating and observing how our moods and our emotions are connected with other people and so forth. And to be able to put some distance between the emotions, the feelings, and so forth, and how we react to them, to be able to observe but not be so reactive. One of my analogies that I like is the idea of, now this is easier for an older person to understand, that is a telephone booth. I think they're almost extinct now, but a bee in a telephone booth can be a big problem. You can get very, shall we say, agitated about a bee in a telephone booth. But if you're out going for a walk in a garden, let's say a park, and you see a bee, really not too much of a problem because they kind of belong in this park. And if we can realize that, well, these different emotions arise, but we can do more observation and less reaction, that we have more stability and we can remain focused on what really is important in life. Here is a quote by Gyalwang Karmapa. Your most important home is your own mind, more than any other. You've got to come back to that home to get to know it a little bit better. And when you rest in your home, even for one moment, it might be the most beautiful rest you ever have. This is the beginning of finding meaning in your life. That is the beginning of making peace with yourself. So meditation leads to this, resting in our own mind and finding meaning in our life. The question was how, when you're in the middle of that, shall we say, strong emotion, how do you kind of extract yourself from that or get out of that or push the pause button? There's two things that can be done. One is doing more meditation so that your mind is a little more stable. Another is when you realize that you are getting really caught up, where it's getting really intense, to immediately just, it's like, you know that if you keep going, you're going to go in a direction that you don't want to go in, and that you don't have the control that you would like to. And so it is just, don't say anything, step back. It's kind of like, well, I don't know, but I'm just going to let this lie for a while. When I was receiving training in the prison, for it was called security for non-uniformed personnel, meaning that I wasn't a guard. And they said that when you are in a situation that's really tense, do this. I don't know. There must have been some Buddhist monk there that developed this policy and training. But the point was to just step back from it, take a few deep breaths, and just taking these deep breaths have a calming effect on the mind and the body. If you can do that, even if it's just 2 or 3 breaths, and then going back, you've accomplished something. If you can take those deep breaths and maybe not go back to whatever it was that was bringing this up, this can be very helpful.